She didn't cry when she read it. That surprised her more than the letter itself. Widow preferred, must be willing to work. Room, board, and terms discussed upon arrival. No name attached to any warmth. Just a place, Coldwater Ridge, Wyoming Territory, and an address for general delivery at a rail stop called Larkin's Crossing. She read it standing on a platform in Millbrook, Kansas, with a trunk at her feet and a wind coming in off the stockyards that smelled like rust and rain. She was 29 years old. 6 months a widow, and she was about to get on a train and go marry a stranger. My name doesn't matter yet, you'll have it soon enough. What matters is that by the time this story starts, I'd already buried a husband, sold a farm out from under his debt, and run clean out of anywhere else to go. Some stories start with a girl who has options. This isn't that story. Her husband, his name was Thomas, had drowned crossing the Sabine on a morning that looked exactly like every other morning right up until it didn't. The current took him, and the current didn't give him back for 3 days. After that came the parts nobody warns a widow about. The bank, the notary, the men in good coats who were sorry for her loss and sorrier, apparently, for their outstanding lien. She signed papers until her hand cramped and walked out of the county office with a sewing basket, one trunk, and a stillness in her chest that she'd later understand was just what it feels like when a person has run out of road. A woman 2 doors down at her boarding house had shown her the notice, torn from a territorial paper somebody's cousin had mailed west. These arrangements aren't what folks think, the woman had said, folding it into Addie's palm like she was passing her a secret. Some of the men are decent. My sister married one. Addie hadn't answered the first time she read it. She'd sat on it 2 full weeks, which told her plenty about how thin her other options had gotten. She wrote back. A man named Warren Locke wrote her exactly 2 sentences in return, in handwriting so economical it looked rationed. The 14th will suit. I will meet the train. No flourish, no waste. She'd told herself that was a good sign. A man who didn't waste words probably didn't waste much else. 7 hours west of anything she recognized, the train let her off at 4:30 into a wind that meant business. Larkin's Crossing wasn't much. Bare platform boards, a covered bench, a main street of maybe 2 dozen buildings still finding their final shape. Raw lumber next to weathered false fronts. A dry goods store with a hand-painted sign, so sun-scoured only the middle letters had survived. She set her trunk down, sat beside it with her sewing basket on her knees, and let the town look at her the way small towns look at anything new the train brings in, not unkind, just thorough. 20 minutes passed, then 10 more. A man finished loading flour sacks and went inside. 2 women outside the mercantile drifted in out of the cold. A boy crossed the street at that diagonal only boys walk when nobody's told them to stop. The platform emptied around her like water draining from a basin, and still nobody came for her. She had his letter in her coat pocket. She hadn't reread it since Abilene, but she knew it by heart. I will meet the train. Today was the 14th. At the half hour, she gave up waiting politely. She carried her trunk to the nearest building, the freight office, and asked the man behind the ledger where she might find the Locke homestead. Something shifted in his face. The small recalibration of a man realizing a simple question has an uncomfortable answer. The place was 4 miles north, he told her. Warren Locke had come through 2 days back for a part, and in the freight agent's own words, had looked like a man carrying a month of bad sleep on his shoulders. She thanked him, found the livery, and paid a boy of about 12 to drive her out. He said nothing beyond the fare. They loaded the trunk together, without either of them asking the other for help. And then she was up on the board seat with the reins in her hands, and the whole flat gold country opening up in front of her under a sky too big to be comfortable. 4 miles is a long time to think and not think at all. She didn't rehearse what she'd say when she arrived. She watched the land instead, the color of the dirt at the road's edge, which way the grass leaned. How the light sat on it in the late afternoon, the way light sits on something that's already decided to leave for the day. She was reading the country the way you read anything you expect to know for a very long time. The homestead came up on her faster than she expected. A low, unpainted house with a porch sagging hard on the left. Behind it a barn built with more ambition than the house had ever gotten, taller, wider, roof gone soft and bowed in the middle like something worn clean out. A chicken coop leaning east. A garden plot turned once that season and abandoned since, the soil cracked into pale plates at the edges. She didn't slow the horse. She looked at all of it exactly the way she'd looked at the road. A man came out of the barn as she pulled into the yard, tall and spare, wiping his hands on a rag that had given up being any color but gray. He stopped in the doorway and watched her bring the horse to a stop. He didn't come help her down. She climbed down herself, looped the reins over the post, and stood there while he crossed the yard toward her, somewhere in his mid-30s, or simply worn that way. A face that had probably been open once and had mostly closed since, not from meanness, just from weather and use and years of handling things alone. He looked at the trunk in the wagon bed without any particular expression on his face. "You'll be the woman from Millbrook," she said, not a question. He'd answered the notice. "Figured," he said. A silence sat between them that wasn't unfriendly and wasn't warm either. He glanced at the wagon, then at her, then at the coupe leaning off true. "Wasn't expecting you till next week," he said. "Train runs Tuesdays." He seemed to weigh that like it was new information, though it plainly wasn't. He tucked the rag through his belt. "House is small," he said. "I've seen small houses. Well's good, though." He said it plainly, the way a man says the one true thing he's got to offer after he's given up trying to dress the rest of it up. She filed that away without comment. They carried the trunk up together, the porch dipping under their combined weight, and set it inside a front room with a table, 2 chairs, a cook stove older than the both of them put together. One bare window, and a shelf holding a tin cup and a lamp swept clean. She noticed the swept part. Either he'd cleaned for her or he kept a clean house out of habit, and she didn't know yet which. He set the trunk in the corner that would apparently be hers. She crossed straight to the stove and opened the firebox. The hinge along the bottom had cracked clean through. Somebody had wired it shut, not elegant, but it held. She tested the wire's give and it didn't budge. "You've got wood split?" she asked, not turning around. "Cord stacked at the side of the house. Half cord more under the lean-to." She nodded at the stovepipe, clean up through the collar, ceiling not blackened around it, which meant either it drew well or it hadn't been used much. She suspected the second. He'd been eating cold or eating somewhere else, and she didn't ask which yet. If you've ever walked into a house and known, inside the first 5 minutes, exactly how much work was waiting for you, you already understand the woman I'm telling you about. What she didn't know yet was how much of that work would end up being him. The shelf held the tin cup, the lamp, and nothing else. No flour, no lard, no salt. Nearest town, Coldwater Ridge. 4 miles east. I go Thursdays for feed, take you then or sooner if you need. "Thursday's fine," she said. He got as far as the doorframe before he stopped and turned half back. "Chickens are out behind the barn, 11 of them. I've been feeding cracked corn from the bin by the coop. 2 of them aren't laying, not sure which 2. He said it with a kind of mild helplessness that wasn't complaint. Just fact, the particular helplessness of a man trying to manage small living creatures without the first idea how. "I'll have a look in the morning," she said. He nodded and went. She listened to his boots cross the porch, drop off the step, and move around toward the barn unhurried, a man with somewhere to be and no rush about getting there. She stood alone in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then she hung her coat over a chair back and put her palm flat against the worn center of the pine table, where years of elbows and plates and hands had smoothed the grain soft while the edges stayed rough. Through the bare window the field stretched out toward a far fence line, the grass thin, the soil pale between the tufts. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they're already doing arithmetic on. She unpacked slowly, methodically. 2 dresses, a wool shawl, a small tin box she set on the sill without opening, a book with a cracked spine, needles and thread wrapped in oilcloth, gloves with one finger mended and one still torn. When the trunk was empty, she pushed it under the cot with her foot and sat on the edge, looking at the room that was hers now. Board walls, gaps chinked gray. One floorboard bowed upward near the center. Anything round would roll west. She'd already noticed. She wasn't unhappy about any of it. She was taking inventory. She was up before him the next morning. Lamp lit, stove going by the time his boots hit the porch. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, not surprised exactly. Something more careful than surprise. She'd already found flour, salt pork, and a small crock of lard in the cabinet by the stove. "Eggs?" she asked. "Not from these hens." Not yet, she made do without. He sat at the table. She set his plate down and sat across from him with her own, and they ate without a word between them while the light outside came up gray and flat. Through the window, the field looked different in morning light, the pale dirt darker with dew, the grass catching low sun so that, briefly, it looked like it might amount to something after all. Fields been planted before, she said. 2 years back didn't hold. What you try, he told her. She listened without lifting her eyes from her plate. And when he finished, she was quiet a moment before saying the soil looked like it needed something put back into it before it would hold anything again. He said he didn't have money for what that would take. She said there might be a way that didn't cost much. He looked at her then, not with hope. She'd have distrusted hope this early. With attention, the particular attention a man gives something he's decided, right there at the table, to take seriously. She carried her plate to the basin. "I'll go look at the chickens now," she said, and he pushed back his chair and followed her out without being asked. The coop was a lean-to off the barn, 3 walls and a slanted roof, gaps wide enough between the boards to show daylight through in stripes. She counted 9 birds, not 11. 2 had gone somewhere, or never existed the way he'd counted them. 2 looked thin through the chest. The straw hadn't been turned in weeks, and the smell told her that before her eyes did. He stood in the doorway and didn't speak while she worked, which she appreciated more than she said. Water basin low, rimmed green at the edge. Feed bin not bad, not good either. When she came back out, she told him the coop needed mucking before winter pressed harder. The gaps needed filling. And 2 birds looked like they'd been fighting or running low on something. She wasn't sure which yet. "I can muck it today," he said. "I can show you a supplement to mix into the feed if it's a deficiency. Eggshell, a little wood ash, dried nettle if you've got it. Don't know about nettle. Grows along the creek south of the fence line, saw it coming in." He looked at her a beat too long. She'd been on his land less than a day and already knew his creek better than he did. He didn't say that. He said he'd go look that afternoon. They passed the garden plot on the way back, posts still standing, beds gone to cracked clay. She stopped. He stopped. "Anybody keep this last season?" "No. Season before? My wife did." He said it the way a man says something he's said so many times it no longer catches on the way out, only on the way back in. She looked a moment longer and walked on. A fence post near the barn had come loose, leaning, wire slack around it. She tested the lean with 2 fingers as she passed. He noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. "Now, if you've ever taken on more than you bargained for and found out 3 days in that you didn't mind, stay with me, because this is where it starts to turn. Inside." She heated water and started on the breakfast basin while he hauled in wood without being told. The sound of each split log dropping into the box filling the kitchen, and then going quiet again. Gray light, no wind. The field sat flat and waiting out past the glass. She cooked without asking what he wanted. Eggs. The last of a cured ham she'd found hanging in the larder. Biscuits from flour she'd sifted twice, because weevils had gotten into the top half of the sack. She set his plate at the end nearest the window, and he sat without comment. She stood at the stove and ate straight from the pan. He noticed that too, and didn't say anything about it either. Outside, she could hear him working a post back into half-frozen ground, 2 or 3 strikes, then a pause to check the lean over and over. Patient in a way that told her something about him she hadn't gotten from 2 sentences in a letter. She found the ledger on the shelf above the wood box, didn't open it, just noted where it lived and left it be for now. By mid-morning, he came in for water and found her at the window with the mending basket, working through a pair of his trousers where the knee had gone thin as paper. "Post set," he said from the doorway, a beat too long before saying it. "Heard it," she said. He got his water and went back out. She finished the trousers and found 2 shirts underneath, one missing a button clean off, one with a collar worn to fraying. She turned the collar so the good side faced out. It'd hold another season, maybe 2. She was still working when he came in for the noon meal and found nothing started on the stove. She was up before he'd gotten his coat off, water heating, salt pork cut. He looked once at the mended trousers over the chair back and said nothing, but before he went back outside, he stopped near the shelf above the wood box, not at the ledger. Just near it, and let his hand rest on the shelf's edge a moment before he went out. The afternoon turned cold faster than she expected. A wind coming down off the hills carrying the smell of ice that hadn't arrived yet, but was close. By the time she'd finished the last collar, the light had gone flat and low. She folded the mended clothes onto the shelf near the door where he'd see them without having to be shown, then took stock of the kitchen stores, flour lower than it should be, salt pork nearly done. Not with alarm, with the particular calm of someone who'd learned that the truth of a thing was always less frightening than not knowing it. She wrote 4 words on a scrap of paper and tucked it in her apron. He came in at dusk, coat dark with sweat despite the cold, washed at the basin without a word. She served supper. Wind found the gaps at the door frame, a thin whistling nothing of a sound. "North fence line's holding," he said, eyes on his plate. "Won't hold through a hard winter, though, not the far corner. Need to get to it before the ground freezes solid." "I understand," she said, and set the paper down beside his plate. He read it, turned it slightly as if the angle might change the words. "It's 4 miles," he said finally. "I've walked farther." He folded the paper once and set it down without answering either way. He didn't say she couldn't go. He didn't offer to take her. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. The way a man does when the cold's gone all the way to the bone and warmth is the first order of business. And looked at the window where the dark had settled complete. And she watched the side of his face and understood he was running numbers she wasn't part of yet. What the store would extend him against. Whether the account had any room left at all. "I can wait till the end of the week if you're going yourself." "I'm not. Tomorrow, then." A short nod, barely a movement. Wind found the door frame again, and she got up, pressed a folded rag into the gap at the bottom, and the sound stopped. She walked in before the frost had fully lifted off the grass. He was already in the barn when she left, and she didn't call out to say so. The road ran pale and rutted under a low white sky, and Coldwater Ridge came up at the base of a long slope. Water tower, grain elevator. A row of storefronts that looked set down in a hurry and never quite straightened since. The woman behind the mercantile counter had the precise, unhurried movements of somebody who'd spent years watching people come and go, and had formed firm opinions about most of them. She looked at Addie's list without touching it first. "Whose account?" "Warren Locke's." The woman studied the list a beat too long. "Accounts thin, last purchase back in September." Balance still carried. She set the list flat on the counter and didn't push it back. Addie looked at what was written. Crossed off 3 items with the pencil offered to her. The nails he needed for the fence, the sugar she could do without, lamp oil that could stretch another week, and slid it back. The woman looked at what remained and said she could do that much against the account. Then, not quite looking up, heard there's someone out there helping him keep the place together. Not a question. Addie answered it like one anyway. "I'm hired through winter." "Cooking, keeping the house." The woman nodded slow, like she was confirming something she'd already decided for herself, and wrapped the goods without another word: cornmeal, lard, a paper of salt. "Tied off in a box with string. Tell him the account needs settling before the new year. If he wants to keep carrying anything on it." Every mail-order story you've ever heard skips this part. The part where the whole town already knows your business before you've unpacked your second. "Dress. Nobody warns you about that. I'm telling you now." She carried the box home, thinking about the nails she'd crossed off, the ones for the north fence post he'd looked at twice already and said nothing about. She thought about how long a man could stare at something unfinished before it started sitting on him differently than a plain chore. He was at the post when she came over the last rise, not looking at it, working it, sleeves shoved up despite the cold, no coat. Straightening old nails off a flat stone he'd found, and driving them into the half-frozen ground with the flat of his hatchet. He'd found a coffee tin of them somewhere, half full, on the shelf above his workbench. His breath came in small clouds. He didn't look up until she was nearly at the gate. She set the box on the fence rail. He glanced at it, then at her, then back down at his work. "One more nail," he said. "Store said the account needs settling before the new year." He nodded once, picked the hatchet back up, and drove the nail flush in 2 clean strokes. She put the cornmeal in the bin, the lard in the cold box, the salt on the shelf, and stood in the kitchen a minute looking at nothing before she tied on her apron and started supper. That evening he washed and sat, and she served him, and neither of them said much through most of it, the wind moving along the eaves outside in long, slow pulls. "Post's done," he said. I saw. He poured a second cup and didn't drink it right away, turning it in his hands the way he did when something was working through him he hadn't yet found the words for. I knew about the nails, he said, that you'd cross them off. Didn't think it worth mentioning. He looked at the cup a long moment. I'll take the mule and end of the week, cordwood I've cut. Ought to be enough for the account and a few things besides. A pause, slower this time. It's enough. She turned back to the stove. Fire had dropped low. She fed it a split piece and waited for the catch, listening to the wind without seeming to listen to anything at all. The cup scraped once against the table as he set it down, but he stayed where he was. She heard the small settling sounds of the house in the wind, the window frame, a nail in the far wall working itself half loose over the season, already on her list, though not near the top. After a while, he pushed back and stood. She heard him lift his coat off the peg and thought he was going to make his last round of the animals before dark. He didn't open the door. Addie, he stopped himself before whatever came next. She turned then, unhurried, the way you turn for someone who's trying to find a thing and needs the room to find it in. He stood holding his coat against his side, not wearing it. I wrote that letter before you came, he said. You know that? I do. Wrote it because the land needed working and I needed somebody who could work it. Thought that was the whole shape of what I was asking for. A pause. I was wrong about the shape of it. The fire moved behind her. You took the thing I handed you, he said, plain, without any dressing on it, the way he said most things, and made it into something I didn't know how to picture. I'm not entirely sure what to do with that. She looked at him standing there with his coat still in his hand, the lamp burning low, the wind running long and even through the yard outside. I didn't come here expecting much, she said. I know. That's changed. He didn't look away, neither did she. Between them, the table held 2 cups, and the lamp, and the ordinary wreckage of a working evening. He set the coat down on the chair and crossed the room toward her, not fast. Nothing in the way he moved that asked a question, and stopped close enough that she could have reached him if she wanted. She did want to. She put her hand flat against his chest, testing it the way you test ice before you trust your full weight to it. He put his hand over hers and just held it there. The fire settled. The loose nail in the far wall ticked once. Neither of them spoke for a long while, the wind running its long, slow pulls along the eaves, their shadows moving with the lamp flame, the dark coming down outside patient and unbothered. The way it always came down over those hills. They stood like that a long time, his hand warm over hers, her palm against the slow, steady work of his heart. The fire dropped to coals, and neither of them moved to feed it. Cold crept in at the edges of the room the way it does in early spring, polite about it, and neither of them minded. At some point she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. Not all of it enough. And if you think that's the end of it, a fire going cold, and 2 people standing quiet in a kitchen, stay with me a little longer. Because the real change hadn't even started yet. He made coffee the next morning the same way he always had, same order, same cup set on the same corner of the counter where she'd find it. She found it, drank it standing at the window while the light came up over the east ridge, and the chickens moved around the yard with their quick heads and their small, reliable industry. She thought about what she'd written in her very first letter back to him. Practical, capable, willing. She'd meant every word of it. She hadn't known, writing it in a boarding house 2 states away, that willingness could grow into something with no clean word attached to it at all. He came in from the barn, jacket still on, and stopped in the doorway when he saw her at the window. Didn't say good morning. Just looked at her the way a man looks at something he's stopped being afraid of losing, which isn't the same as looking at something he's sure of. It was the better of the 2. Spring came in earnest a few weeks later. The upper pasture softened. The fence line held straight through the thaw. The second row of the kitchen garden, the one she'd planned herself, straight and unhurried, came up green right on schedule. And she stood in the dirt one afternoon with her hands on her hips looking at it, feeling something she didn't try to put a name to. The mercantile woman stopped her on the road in April and told her the homestead was looking fine these days. Said more than one person had mentioned the eastern quarter was about the most organized piece of ground in the whole territory. Said it the way people say a thing when they're also saying something else underneath it. Addie thanked her and kept walking. That evening he fixed the last of the porch boards without being asked. She heard the hammer from inside and didn't go out to check on him. She set the table instead, put the lamp where the light fell best, and waited. He came in, washed his hands, dried them, looked at the table, looked at her, and sat down. She sat across from him. Outside, the hills went dark the slow way they do in that season, the sky holding its color longer than you'd expect it to. The chickens settled in. The yard went quiet. Inside, the lamp burned low and steady, same as it always had, and they ate together in the good, plain, unbothered silence of two people who'd finally stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. I've thought about that kitchen a lot since I first heard this story. The way two strangers can start out trading chores like a business arrangement and end up trading something neither one of them had a word for yet. What would you have done, standing on that platform with nobody there to meet you, turned around and gone home, or got in the wagon anyway? Tell me where you're watching this from tonight. And if this one got you, hit like, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment about the moment it turned for you, because I read every single one.